Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Development Management Committee. First thing I have to say is that those present at the meeting should be aware that by law it can be recorded by anyone attending. This means that the meeting can be filmed, audio recorded, photographed or reported electronically by the use of social media. And this does not apply to any part of the meeting that's held in private session. Therefore, anyone present should be aware that they could be recorded at this meeting. Any member of the public who does not wish to be filmed should move to an area of the meeting room away from the camera, and anyone recording must cease as soon as the meeting is declared closed. The meeting is being webcast by the Council. Does anyone else intend to record? No. Okay, thank you. So item 1, substitutions. We have Lynn for Tara Mary, and we have Harry for John Beckman. Confirm as the correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of March. Do we agree with those? Thank you. Now, notification of urgent business or items withdrawn. I can tell you that item 7 has been withdrawn because North Midlands Parish Council withdrew its objection and therefore no need to come to committee, and item 9 has been withdrawn for further consideration. So item 5, declaration of interest by members. Don't think there's anything. No. Right, so item 6 then is Entech House, London Road, Woolmer Green. It's the erection of 72 residential units consisting of 46 houses, 657 square metres of retail floor space, 485 metres of office floor space, with associated landscaping, parking and infrastructure involving demolition of the existing industrial B2 buildings and residential units.
Thank you, Chair. Site's located on the northern edge of the settlement of Woolmer Green and is currently occupied by a design and manufacturing company for the rail industry. Members may recall that this application was presented at committee last September and was refused planning permission, primarily on the loss of a proposed designated employment site in the emerging local plan, where that proposal did not meet draft policy and would predetermine decisions about employment and residential development being considered within the examination for the emerging local plan. Further reasons for refusal were associated with the lack of information with regard to flood risk and also the lack of a Section 106 agreement. The applicant has sought to overcome those reasons for refusal, and this application is now accompanied by a viability assessment and a marketing or updated marketing information, together with updated drainage information. No alterations are made to the actual design and layout of the scheme, where no objections were raised previously in this regard, and subsequently no objections are raised now. The Lead Local Flood Authority have removed their objections with regard to flooding. However, the principal reason for refusal remains. The site is not an allocated employment site within the adopted district plan, and there are no objections to the proposal when assessed against this plan. However, the emerging local plan allocates this site as part of a designated employment area, and draft policy outlines that proposals which result in the loss of land from Class B use to another use will only be permitted subject to certain criteria which are listed at paragraph 10.26 of the officer's report. One of those criteria refers to the marketing of the site for a period of 3 years. Officers have sought the views of an independent advisor, Davies & Co, on the marketing information, who considers that it does not evidence that the site has been actively, extensively and realistically marketed for a period of 3 years. That conclusion is based on the amount of time the site has been marketed for, which is under 3 years, no reference to the site actively being promoted for a sale to an owner-occupier market, the amount of interest received, including an offer to purchase the site, the development potential of the site, including the extent of undeveloped land, the lack of marketing for different permutations of the site and buildings, and the unrealistically high rental price of the property. The loss of this site could also prejudice the continued use of neighbouring land for employment, as the site, together with sites on the opposite side of London Road, form a significant cluster of B-use employment land. Additionally, the use does not provide facilities that are supportive Class B uses. Therefore, the proposal fails to comply with all three criteria within this emerging draft employment policy. The applicant has also submitted a viability assessment which seeks to demonstrate that the site is unviable other than for a residential use. However, there is no requirement under adopted or draft policy to demonstrate that a site is unviable. The test is purely of demand. This report has also been reviewed on behalf of the Council by an independent advisor, BNP, and they consider a large majority of the appraisal inputs are reasonable. However, one of the key areas of discrepancy relate to the benchmark land value, and that is the land value of the site in its current state, plus, where appropriate, a landowner's premium. BNP consider that this should be based on its existing employment use rather than its proposed residential use, which the applicant bases it on. And on that basis, they consider the site can viably continue in a B-class commercial use. In addition to the above, the site would come forward as an unplanned windfall residential development, and this site, together with the allocated residential site to the north of Woolmer Green, which proposes 150 homes, would together result in a disproportionate amount of residential development coming forward in Woolmer Green, which could have the potential to undermine the strategy in the local plan. Overall, the proposals run counter to a number of provisions in the emerging local plan. Whilst weight should be given to the existing policy in the adopted district plan, given the advanced stage of the emerging plan, where we are currently at examination, significant weight should be given to these policies, together with the Council's employment evidence for retaining this land as employment land. The proposal is therefore clearly premature and would undermine the plan-making process by predetermining decisions about the location of employment and residential development that are central to that plan. Accordingly, the application is recommended for refusal based on this, and also the lack of a Section 106 for the necessary contributions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now we have public speaking, as you will all know. And the first speaker tonight is Kathleen Urban, who is the agent. If you'd like to come to the table in the middle, you have 3 minutes, and after 2.5 minutes I shall shout out half a minute, and then at the end of the 3 minutes you cease. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. As you will have read in your report in front of you, the scheme is supported in all technical respects and indeed is accepted as good design. The site will provide Woolmer Green with much needed commercial facilities, contributing an additional 60 full-time jobs and 20 part-time jobs, also providing 22 new affordable dwellings and 15 market dwellings, all to a high quality and incorporating appropriate levels of amenity, whilst also being accepted in highways and car parking and improving pedestrian permeability. There is no dispute between the applicant and the Council about what ought to be in a satisfactory Section 106 agreement, with the suggested contributions agreed in principle by the applicant. Taylor Wimpey has worked collaboratively with officers throughout the application process, even paying the Council's consultants to undertake their own independent examination of technical work, and at no small sum. As pointed out in the report, it is also worth noting that the scheme for the same proposals is due to be heard by way of inquiry in September, and this is to progress full steam ahead unless the application is supported this evening. As with all applications in front of your committee, the starting point for your decision tonight should be the adopted local plan, which in this case contains no reason why planning should not be approved this evening. Indeed, if you review the reasons of refusal in the reports ahead of you, there is no mention at all of the local plan. The scheme, therefore, in all respects, accords with the adopted policies which govern development in Welwyn Hatfield. The refusal of this application is thus solely based on the emerging plan, which in its current state is found unsound by the inspector, with it widely acknowledged by both council and the inspector that it does not provide sufficient residential land to meet the fully objectively assessed housing needs of the authority, with a deficit of some 3,000 dwellings. Nor does this plan suggest where alternative land may be found. There is thus an absolute acute need for housing within your borough. The government reminds us that to be successful, employment land has to be allocated in the right places, and not to hang on to land which hasn't been or is unlikely to be developed for employment purposes. There is no evidence to suggest that under your emerging policy, Entech House will deliver the new jobs that your plan expects it to. The risk therefore arises: hold on to available land with the fleeting chance that it may deliver new jobs within the next 20 years, or facilitate the redevelopment of the site now for high quality housing and employment generating uses. Simply put, is a site like Entech House essential for the future prosperity of the borough when there is such a pressing need for housing?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a problem with this application. On the one hand, we want housing, but as the report says, we're losing employment land, and we keep losing employment land when offices are converted to residential. And we've talked about this before, and even the report is saying we're going to be short of employment land. And then, yes, it's in the emerging local plan, but are the applicants going in before it gets designation changed within the plan? And so, on balance, I'm going to go with the officer recommendation for refusal.
Okay, thank you. Sound. I would say the plan hasn't been found unsound yet, because it is still under discussion. Mandy, would you like to? I mean, that's how it is, and until the inspector reaches the end of his discussions with us and finds it unsound or not, I don't think at the moment it is unsound.
What we've had so far from the inspector has shown that he's happy with where he's got so far, that the plan is sound. Obviously, we still have a long way to go, and I would hate to predetermine what the inspector's going to say.
The other thing to consider is that we have, of course, allowed housing in commercial areas before. We have allowed office blocks to be converted into churches, more than once, in fact, in recent times. So it does, I think, hang to an extent. There is the question of the commercial use. There's also the question of the marketing. And members will have to decide if sufficient marketing has been carried out to state that there is not the need for the employment land there, or whether it hasn't. Yes, Colin.
Account of the says so in the MPPF, because it's been submitted, it can have a degree of weight in your decision making. That policy has been debated as part of the examination, and although the inspector hasn't given us any formal conclusions on that, he did seem to accept the principle of 3 years of marketing was a reasonable policy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was interested in the fact that not sufficient marketing seems to have been done just over a year, and also, contrary to what has been said by the speaker, and I apologise for this, but I can't help noticing that in 10.32 we're told that there was an offer to purchase a site from an owner-occupier, but the interest was not pursued, and this hasn't been explained. And then lower down in 10.34, there were 86 formal inquiries over the year, 46 of which were for Class B use. And although only 3% viewed the property, nevertheless there was, it seems to me, significant interest. So I don't quite follow what has, what the argument from the agent is really with regard to the fact that it wouldn't be viable as employment land. If the other required 2 years of marketing was done and done efficiently, it may well be that it wouldn't be difficult to find somebody to use the land for as employment land. Thank you.
It is the case, though, that even for employment land, it's got to be commercially sensible. And I mean, I don't have the figures in front of me, but if they've had several offers at £3 a foot, say, for the industrial part of it, and that's not a commercial rent, or the offer for purchase has not been commercially viable, commercially sensible, it isn't a question of just finding someone who uses the space. It must be commercially, for the owners, it must be a proper commercial deal, and we accept that is the case. Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also conflicted. On the one hand, yes, we know we do need housing. However, I am also drawn to Para 1026, which, it clearly states that policy SADM10 state that proposals which result in the loss of land from Class B use will only be permitted where 3 exceptions can be met. And we've heard that actually there hasn't been adequate marketing of the site over the 3 years. The proposed use is not compatible with the neighbouring uses if it moves to housing, because actually it is on the other side of the road is employment, and the third item in accordance with policy SP8 as well, providing facilities that are supportive of Class B uses. And I think, unfortunately we are in a situation that although we do need housing, we can't ignore this. And so from that point of view, I think I would definitely support officers' recommendations. And just a further point, I'm concerned that the Art Deco house was going to be, in the original design, the Art Deco house was going to be demolished. I think that's a great shame.
Okay, thank you. Terry? Oh, sorry, Terry. Lynn was actually first.
Yeah, I'm really sort of supporting what Fiona and Mike said, but I do feel, as much as I've been one of the first ones to say we need housing, I feel as if this application's really jumped the gun. We haven't got a 106 agreement. It's fine saying it's nearly there, but lots of things can be nearly there and then go very wrong at the end. And I think we need things signed, sealed and delivered. I just think this has come too soon. Equally, if we keep ignoring and not marketing land for employment, we are going to end up with places like Walmer Green being dormitory villages, because there will be no work there and everyone will be travelling somewhere else. And we've seen it in places where that leads to just no community, and I'm really worried that if we don't get this right, we could end up with a village that has no heart, has no community, might have nice houses, but we need to make sure the 106 is signed, sealed, delivered.
Okay, before Terry, Sarah will come back on a couple of points.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify a couple of things. With regard to your point, Councillor Thompson, on criteria 2 of policy SADM10, where you said the proposed uses wouldn't be compatible with neighbouring uses, the concern officers actually have is that it would prejudice the continued use of neighbouring land for employment, because this site together with sites on the opposite side of London Road, form an employment area, and we have concerns that the loss of this site could lead to the loss of those other sites. With regard to your point, with regard to the 106, the applicant has agreed to their heads of terms of that. So it would just be about progressing with those. So it just hasn't been submitted, completed, signed, but they have agreed to those terms, which are at the back of the report.
I think I've got to see it signed.
Terry.
It's been covered now by the time he got round to me, but I mean, it's premature, effectively. It's going to be discussed during the upcoming inquiry. I see no reason why we should be making a decision now. What concerns me also is that if we start losing these sort of sites that are possibly going to be allocated. If we don't have them allocated, then we're going to be ending up by finding more spaces in the green belt over and above what we're going to have to find for extra houses. We'll end up having to find extra green belt for commercial land as well. So, you know, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and I just think at the moment it's just premature, as was stated by the officer.
Yeah, I mean, I've made plenty of representations at this panel before about the loss of employment land, and again, I think that what Terry said just then rings very true. If we're trying to promote exceptional circumstances for release of greenbelt for employment use in the current submitted local plan, to then allow this site, which is one of the sites in there, to go forward for housing instead, means we then need a commercial site instead, which means we're basically redoing the local plan, which is what is going on here, and why this is a premature application, why it predetermines what's happening in the local plan. So there's no way I think this panel should support it. It undermines what our local plan as submitted says, and it's an inappropriate way of dealing with it. So I'll be voting against. Can I just add, however, one of the things that I'm a little frustrated about is that because there was no objection in the original about the landscaping and the structure and design, we're being told that the design is good design. That's not the interpretation I have of the officer's report in here, but I appreciate that that's not a point on which a refusal should be based. I get that, but it's just to point out my frustration that actually I'm not entirely convinced that this is good design, given statements in, for example, 1087, where it says, you know, there's been an attempt to work collaboratively with a developer to see if a scheme could be designed to achieve required numbers and viability, but also be acceptable in urban design and reduce the number of units on the site to make way for more landscaping. These discussions were also held at pre-application stage with little progress. I think that's a little frustrating, that actually if officers are of the opinion that this isn't particularly good design, that we didn't originally list that as part of our concerns, because that goes to the MPPF statements about good design and appropriate design, and I'm not convinced that this development is that.
Important to the discussion. The point I made was that the paragraph said that the officers need to decide whether it was sufficiently good design or not, and whether it was sufficiently harmful to be one of the conditions for refusal, which they hadn't done. So that wasn't. Yes, Mandy.
If I may, I'm in support of what Paul's just said. It was only either Tuesday or I think yesterday that the Secretary of State was actually saying that we should be looking for good design in housing. And I think we need to take that on board. I don't know how much can be now reined in from the decision back last September, but I think it's something that we really ought to be very cognizant of, that people deserve to live in nice houses. They may be dense, but I think we should take note of it.
You're right, and that echoes something I've been saying for years on this committee, that some of the designs we see are not, I'm not talking about this one, but other designs are not of first quality. Anyone else? No? Okay, so what you've got to decide is whether the officer's report, which is for refusal, mainly because of the loss of employment land, is what you agree with, or whether the need for housing as such. Paul, you picked me up on this last time. It is correct to say this would be a windfall site and therefore would not count against our numbers in the plan, so that although I said last time that if you've got to have a piece out of Greenbelt, in a sense it doesn't matter whether it's for employment or for housing if you've got to take a piece out, but you said that this would be a windfall site and not count towards saving numbers in the Greenbelt. Right, may I have a proposal then?
Officer recommendation.
Thank you. Mike, seconder? Paul. Right, so the proposal is that we accept the officer's recommendation, which is to refuse permission. Now we're voting with hands up tonight. System isn't working. So those in favour of that proposal, please show. Okay, that's unanimous. Right. Thank you. So that one is refused. Right, the next one is number 8, which is Marin House, 56 Hertford Road, Digswell, Welwyn, conversion of existing garage to an independent residential dwelling unit, including the insertion of 3 rear dormer windows, new windows and doors, and alterations and erection of a single attached garage.
Can I have my microphone?
Of course, right.
Thank you, Chair. This application is presented to the committee following a major objection from Welwyn Parish Council as set out at paragraph 9.1. The application site is located to the southeastern edge of Digswell and is currently occupied by a triple garage outbuilding, which serves the existing dwelling known as Marin House. The application seeks permission for the conversion of the existing garage to an independent residential dwelling, including the insertion of 3 dormer windows, other windows and alterations, and the addition of a single attached garage to the side of the property. Members will note from the planning history at paragraph 4.3 that the Council has already granted planning permission for the conversion of the garage, along with the dormer windows, other windows and alterations, to independent residential use in March 2016. This was a decision of the Development Management Committee. Whilst this has not yet been implemented, the permission remains extant. Notwithstanding this, the current application again seeks permission for the residential use of this building and an extension to it. For the purposes of Greenbelt policy, this requires consideration as to whether the further extension would be proportionate when considered in the context of the original dwelling. In the case of this site, the original dwelling was the listed Marin Cottage. This property has in turn been significantly extended to the point where those extensions themselves then formed the creation of Marin House. The building under consideration tonight was a further addition, originally as a garage, to Marin House. Therefore, the original building has already been extended significantly over and above the original. This means that the relatively minor side extension to the current garage building is considered to represent inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. As such, a case of very special circumstances is required in order to justify the proposed extension. The applicant has proposed to remove 3 structures to the rear of the garage building, which currently spread their way into the more open parts of the site. These include the log store and 2 of the 3 outbuildings. Given the relatively minor nature of the extension, this trade-off is considered to form a case of very special circumstances. As well as this, the proposal is not considered to significantly harm the openness of the greenbelt, nor conflict with the purposes of including land within it. Other considerations are set out in the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions members may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Two speakers on this one. The first one is Paul Kaspersky, who is the applicant. Thank you.
Hello. This application is obviously for the small garage, not the actual house itself, is it? Okay, because our application is purely for a single garage to the side.
The additional element proposed is the garage to the side,
That's
but the
right.
application that's been submitted includes in the description
All right,
the
okay.
conversion of the building to a separate dwelling as well, albeit,
Okay.
as I've just described, that's already been accepted by the council previously.
That's right, okay. Okay. So for this garage, it's purely in the area adjacent to the property, leading up to the side entrance to St John's School. Only. This application is for the single garage that lies adjacent to the existing garage.
The additional element you're proposing is
Yeah.
the single garage. The reason that everything's included in the description is because
Yeah.
you haven't implemented your existing permission for the conversion of the main garage building to a separate residential property. Therefore, it's all included in the description of development this time, albeit the only addition over and above what you already have planning permission for is the single garage attached to the side
Okay.
of that building.
Right, okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I said that this was our application to implement the small dwelling to the small garage to the side only. Yeah, that was it.
The next speaker then is Magdalene Benson from Welwyn Parish Council.
Okay. I sit here confused, totally confused, because I came here to speak for the parish council, and I came here to say that the design of the intended residency plus the garage was of a poor quality, and that it would actually afford a very cramped residence and would be unsuitable for permanent occupation. I do believe that your previous consent was given as guest rooms as an annex to the previous original property on the site. If I may continue. Yeah, because you'll time me otherwise. We note the application is an additional house, a dwelling house, in the green belt, and that we do believe this to be inappropriate, and there are sufficient policies that suggest this would be inappropriate, and that there are no special circumstances. And I believe in your report you've cited as special circumstances the demolition of the outbuildings. Well, again, we, the parish council, would not accept that as special circumstances to afford a separate dwelling to occur on greenbelt land in an area where previously the property has already been extensively developed. Further to that, we think that the harm that this property would do both to the greenbelt and to the original listed property would outweigh any acceptance on your part. We can only reiterate that we consider this to be inappropriate development. We did so right at the very beginning. We've consistently said that we do not feel this to be appropriate development. It's certainly not appropriate long-term residency development. You've already, as heard this evening, asked for an extension to that property of a garage. It was originally a garage. I think it was originally linked to the house. And when you start to break that down, you can see why we've consistently said we think this is inappropriate. I have really nothing further to say other than I remove myself and put myself in your hands.
Just members, can I refer you to page 70? And you will see that paragraph 4.4 was the conversion of the garage to the guest annex accommodation, which was approved in 2015. And then 4.3 was conversion of the garage to an independent residential dwelling unit, including the insertion of 3-number rear dormer windows and replacement new windows and doors. That was approved in 2016. So those elements, including the independent living, if you like, the independent residential dwelling unit, those elements were approved in 2016.
I don't know how that relates, but there clearly was an application.
There are, above that, there were 2 further applications for extending the area, but they were refused, as you can see, in 2016, dismissed on appeal, and refused in 2017. But the permission is there for independent residential use with the dormer windows. Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check, because I too am somewhat confused. So 4.3, conversion of garage to an independent residential dwelling unit, that's been approved, I accept that. 4.2 above, were you saying, Chair, that if you look at including 2-storey extension, so that's in addition to that which was approved, and it was the in addition to which was refused in 2016, which then was reapplied for again, and that also includes the demolition of existing log store and outbuildings, which I think maybe you mentioned is what's been suggested this time, Chris, as special circumstances.
The reference at 4.2 was for the already approved conversion of the garage plus 2-storey extensions to that building. That was found unacceptable both by the council and on appeal. The one at the top was for at 4.1 was for an extension, a rear extension to the garage building, which was also found unacceptable by the council. What we're considering this time is a side extension, and as I explained earlier, the very special circumstances considered by officers are the removal of the other outbuildings as essentially a trade-off of floor space and volume to make that extension acceptable.
The application in front of us tonight, as well as 4.1 and 4.2, the 3 of them rather go over the already approved building on site, which is the conversion of the garage and 3 dormer windows. So those 2 suggest that once again they want the conversion of the garage and then with extra things on, whereas I suppose tonight we could have just had an application for side extension.
Well, because the permission for the conversion of the building to a separate residential unit hasn't been implemented, that's why it's all included in the description again. If it had been implemented, then they could have sought a single-storey side extension to that building.
If it had been just started.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dwelling was not implemented. As I understand it, the permissions were granted only as an annex. No.
as the Chair has just described, 4.4, there was planning permission for conversion to a guest annex. Then later, in March 2016, permission was granted for conversion to independent residential use, so an independent residential dwelling.
I'd just like a little bit of clarification. Not on the situation with the garage. It's quite clear the applicant has permission for an independent residential dwelling unit. What we're talking about here is the garage extension. The first question I have is, are we confident that the removal of permitted development rights would prevent that garage becoming converted to an additional bedroom, so effectively enabling the delivery of a 3-bedroom residential dwelling rather than a 2-bedroom residential dwelling by default? And second, in terms of the volume and floor space of the existing log store and outbuildings that are going to be demolished, is it equivalent, or is there a proportionality thing going on in terms of the mass and floor space between the buildings that are going to be demolished and the buildings that are going to be built, the garage?
Haven't would restrict conversion of the garage, and we haven't got calculations in the report with regard to the volume of the buildings. However, it's not just about volume and footprint, it's about the impact and location of those buildings on the openness of the greenbelt. So it's a broader consideration than a straightforward sort of trade-off calculation.
I appreciate there's a trade-off, and the position of a building and its orientation and its relationship with other buildings is clearly critical. But it's I think a pertinent factor. If the garage that is being proposed is the same volume as the buildings that are being lost, it's clearly a benefit to the green belt and therefore a positive of the development as proposed. If it is 3 times the size in volume terms, then there has to be more of a balance made. So I was just asking the question as to where we were.
On the screen, please. So the plan displayed on the screen, you can see the garage building with the 3 dormer windows and the single-storey extension proposed to the side of it. To the right of that, as we look, the first 2 of those 3 outbuildings would be demolished, as well as a log store, which isn't shown on that plan, to the rear of the garage itself. So, yeah.
Based on the first point, is there a condition that we could put in place? I'm not aware of one that would enable us to do that. But my concern here is that if we allow them to build a garage and they actually build an extra bedroom, what they've got is a 3-bedroom dwelling without us having given permission for a 3-bedroom dwelling.
Well, they'd have to come back here to apply for permission.
Would they? Would they? That was the question, actually, Stephen. Sorry, Chair. Was whether they would have to do that.
Difficult to condition it. It would be difficult to regulate it. Even if you tried to condition it, it would be difficult to know what was going on. And if it came back with the built form already there, it would be quite difficult to refuse, I think. I'd have to look at whether you could put a valid condition on it, but I think it would be very difficult.
Just a brief point, really. I think the damage has already been done when the original so-called extension was agreed to the back of Marin House, which was probably twice the size of the original house when it was built. It's obvious that the planning permission has already been given for the bulk of this application. So much as it pains me. I find it very confusing that this is a very, very landmark site in Digswell, and yet it's been allowed to be developed to such an extent, and yet other places, which are hardly seen by anywhere, get refusals. So I'd struggle sometimes to get the whole greenbelt thing. But for this actual application, we're just talking about, taking some bits away and sticking the space on the end. So I don't see that there's any rationale for refusal.
Oh, don't be shy. Okay, Barbara, thank you. Right, so we have a proposal which has been seconded that we accept the officer's recommendation. All those in favour, please show. That's all but one, and those against? Okay, that is carried. Right. Item 10, appeal decisions. You will note the appeal decisions.
Did you want to mention the Finance Committee?
Yes. Yeah, go on.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to mention one of the appeal decisions simply because it was a committee decision at... No, don't get me wrong. At 26 Great North Road, it was very finely balanced. Officers felt the same, and it has been allowed on appeal. Otherwise, you'll see that the prevailing wind of appeals being allowed seems to be gathering, and we will continue to try and adjust our thinking to reflect that as best we can.
When we've had a whole run before of negative appeal decisions, in years gone by, we have written a letter to the Secretary of State. We intend to do the same at the moment.
Applications, which have been on there for a while now.
They do get updated.
They do, yeah. Okay, that's it. May I just thank you all, as we are at the end of the year, the municipal year. Thank you all for your help and attendance this year, and special thanks to the officers who have put up with our badgering and hit over the last 12 months. So thanks everybody, and see you next year, maybe.